The sun beat down on the Arizona desert like a blacksmith's hammer, merciless and hot, as Cole guided his chestnut horse through the wasteland. Dust clung to his duster, his hat shading eyes that had seen too much war, too many graves. He wasn't a man running toward anything, just away from the ghosts that trailed behind. The wind whispered over the red rocks, carrying the scent of mesquite and sage, and somewhere beyond the next ridge came the distant echo of gunfire. Cole reined in his horse, listening. Bandits, maybe, or cavalry drills. Either way, trouble. But then he saw smoke curling against the sky thin. Dark, wrong. A village fire. His instincts fled, and before he knew why, he was riding hard toward it. When he reached the ridge, he saw the remnants of an Apache camp, half burned, half abandoned, and among the wreckage she was there, a woman crouched beside a fallen warrior, her black hair loose in the wind, her face streaked with ash. Her eyes met his across the distance, sharp and proud, but filled with pain. Cole dismounted slowly, raising his hands. He wasn't there to fight. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice low and rough. She stared at him in silence, one hand on the knife at her belt. The desert went still between them. In that scorching moment, Cole knew this wasn't just another burned camp. It was the start of something he couldn't walk away from. The woman rose from beside the fallen warrior, the knife still in her hand, her gaze steady as moonlight on water. "My name is Naya," she said in a voice low and clear, touched with the rhythm of her people's tongue. "He was my brother." The words cut through Cole like a bullet. He removed his hat, bowing his head in respect. "I'm sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to intrude." She looked him over, suspicion flickering behind her grief. "White men brought the soldiers," she answered, her tone bitter as desert iron. "Now you come." Cole took a careful step forward. "Not with them," he said, "just passing through." The silence that followed was thick with heat and mistrust. A buzzard circled overhead. The fire popped. Naya finally lowered the blade, her hand trembling from exhaustion more than fear. Cole knelt, offering his canteen. She hesitated, then took it, drinking in slow, measured sips as if testing his truth in the taste of water. When she handed it back, her eyes had softened. Just a touch. "They will come again," she murmured, glancing toward the horizon. "Soldiers or outlaws. They take what they want." Cole looked out at the same horizon wide, endless and forgiving. He'd spent years trying not to care about what happened to anyone, but something about her quiet fire, her courage standing alone in the ashes made it impossible. "Then I'll stay till they don't," he said simply. Naya studied him, the faintest ghost of a smile touching her lips before she turned back to the wreckage. The desert wind stirred, carrying the scent of burning cedar and fate. Somewhere in that lonely wasteland, two lives had crossed, and neither would ever be the same again. By nightfall, the desert cooled beneath a deep red sky, the stars sharp as flint. Cole and Naya worked in silence, burying her brother beneath a cairn of stones. She spoke a few words in Apache soft, melodic, carrying the kind of sorrow no English prayer could hold. Cole stood beside her, hat in hand, feeling like a trespasser in something sacred. When the last stone was laid, Naya turned toward the dark ridges beyond the camp. "They will come before dawn," she said. "The men who did this." Cole's hand rested on the butt of his revolver. "How many?" "4, maybe 5, she answered. Her voice didn't tremble, but her eyes flicked toward the charred remains of her home. "They came for horses. They took what they could not earn." Cole spat into the dust. "Then we'll give 'em a welcome they won't forget." He moved to his saddlebag and began checking his ammunition, sliding bullets into his Colt with a quiet, practiced rhythm. Naya watched him from the firelight, her face half-shadowed. "Why do you help me?" she asked finally. Cole paused, meeting her eyes. "Because I've seen too many good folks left in the dirt while bad men rode free," He shrugged, looking down at the gun in his hand. "And maybe owe the world a little payback." Naya said nothing, but there was something in her gaze, a small, flickering trust. They shared a meager meal of dried meat and corn, the fire burning low between them. Out in the darkness, coyotes howled, and the desert felt alive with unseen eyes. Cole sat with his rifle across his knees, every muscle taut. Naya sat opposite, her long black hair swaying with the wind, her knife gleaming at her side. As the night deepened, she looked across the flames and said softly, "If we live through this, Cole, you will go." He hesitated, staring into the embers. "Can't say," he murmured. "Ain't figured where I belong yet." The stars wheeled slowly above them, silent witnesses to a promise neither had spoken, but both could feel burning between them like a slow kindling fire. The desert went quiet just before dawn, the kind of stillness that makes a man's heart beat, sound like thunder in his own ears. Cole had been awake for hours, his rifle balanced across his knees, eyes fixed on the distant ridgeline where the stars met the sand. Naya moved like a ghost between the rocks, her bow strung, her bare feet silent on the earth. She'd painted streaks of ash across her cheeks, the old marks of war and protection, and even in the dim light, she looked fierce and unbreakable. Then, faint as the hiss of a rattler, came the sound of hooves. Cole's jaw tightened. "They're comin'," he whispered. Naya nodded once, slipping behind a mesquite bush, her bow ready. 5 riders crested the ridge, rough men with whiskey in their veins and greed in their eyes. The leader's laughter carried through the cold air. "Apache gold, boys. Let's finish what we started." Cole waited until they were close enough for the firelight to touch their faces, then raised his rifle and fired. The first shot split the silence, and one outlaw tumbled from his saddle like a sack of grain. The others shouted, returning fire in a hail of sparks and sand. Naya's arrows flew swift and deadly, finding targets with an erring aim. Cole fought like a man possessed, each shot deliberate, his movements sure and steady. The night exploded in chaos, horses screaming, gunfire echoing off the cliffs. One bandit charged straight at him, revolver blazing, but Cole rolled behind a rock, drew his knife, and met him head-on. Steel flashed, blood spilled, and when it was done, the man lay still in the dirt. When the last echo faded, only the wind remained, moaning across the open desert. Cole leaned against a boulder, breathing hard, his shirt torn and blood seeping from a cut along his arm. Naya emerged from the shadows, bow still in hand, her dark eyes burning with victory and relief. "It is done," she whispered. Cole managed a grin, tipping his hat. "You shoot better than any man I've ever met," she smiled faintly. "I am not a man, Cole." He chuckled low. "Reckon that's what scares me most." And in the quiet that followed, something shifted between them, something fierce and tender, as wild as the desert itself. When the first streaks of dawn broke over the desert, they painted the mesas in fire and gold. The air smelled of gunpowder and death, but also of survival. Cole rose stiffly from where he'd been sitting, wiping sweat and dust from his brow. Round him lay the aftermath of the night's battle. 5 men who'd come hungry for blood and left with none to spare. Naya stood a few yards away, her bow still in her hand, her face unreadable in the morning light. Together, without words, they began the grim work of burying the dead. Cole dug with his knife and a piece of broken wood, while Naya gathered stones. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was the kind that came from shared struggle, the kind that said more than words ever could. When the last grave was covered, Cole poured a line of sand across it, murmuring, "May the desert keep what it's taken." Naya's gaze lingered on him, her expression softening. "You fight like one who has lost before," she said. Cole gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe I have. Maybe that's why I keep fighting." They sat beneath a lone sakura, sharing what little water they had left. The heat was already building, shimmering off the dunes, but a strange calm had settled over the land. Naya unwrapped a strip of cloth and pressed it against the gash on Cole's arm. Her touch was gentle, sure. "You should not have stayed," she said quietly. "This was not your war." Cole looked up at her, the desert sun glinting off his eyes. "Maybe not," he said. "But I reckon a man's got to choose what kind of stories he wants told about him when he's gone." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, a warrior's nod, full of respect. "You are strange, Cole," she said softly, almost smiling. "For a white man." He chuckled, the sound rough but real. "Ain't the first time I've heard that." The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of faraway rain, rare, distant, but full of promise. Cole squinted toward the horizon. "Where will you go now?" he asked. Naya's eyes followed the same line, toward the red cliffs that rose like ancient watchmen. "Home," she said, "to the canyon of my people. If it still stands." Cole's voice was low, certain. "Then I'll ride with you, Naya. Least till you're safe." She looked at him then, truly looked, and for the first time since her world had burned. She didn't feel alone. They left the ashes of the camp behind before the sun climbed high. Cole rode beside Naya across the open desert, their horses kicking up trails of dust that shimmered like smoke. The land stretched wide and endless. Redstone, dry riverbeds, scattered cactus standing like sentinels of an unforgiving world. Neither spoke much. Words seemed too small beneath that sky. Now and then, Naya would point out a mark in the sand, a coyote track, the trail of a rattler, the faint print of moccasins. "Others have passed this way," she murmured once. "Apache?" Cole asked. She nodded. "Maybe. Maybe not." There was always danger in those words. He scanned the horizon with cautious eyes, his hand never far from his gun. By midday, the heat grew cruel, and they found shade beneath a rock ledge. Naya unwrapped dried corn and venison from her pack, offering half to Cole. He took it with a nod of thanks. For a long while, they ate in silence, the sound of cicadas and distant wind their only company. "You don't talk much," Naya said finally. Cole gave a crooked smile. "Used to. Then life taught me it's better to listen." She tilted her head, studying him. "What did it teach you to hear?" He hesitated, looking out over the sunlit plains. "That everyone's got ghosts, and sometimes they're louder than thunder." Something softened in her eyes. "My mother used to say the desert remembers all who walk it," she said. "Maybe your ghosts follow because the earth has not yet forgiven you." Cole let out a slow breath. "Wouldn't surprise me none." Their eyes met then, just a heartbeat of silence between them, but it carried more truth than 100 words. She looked away first, tucking a strand of black hair behind her ear. The heat shimmered round them, turning the world to gold. When they rode again, the land began to rise, red cliffs in the distance, the gateway to the Apache Canyon. Cole felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in his purpose. The wind whipped Naya's hair as she rode ahead, proud and unyielding, a figure carved from the desert itself. Watching her, Cole couldn't help but smile under his brim. He wasn't sure if he was chasing redemption, or if redemption had found him riding in the form of a woman named Naya. The red cliffs rose like ancient guardians against the horizon, their faces streaked with centuries of wind and sun. Cole and Naya rode into the mouth of the canyon as the day's heat faded into amber light. The air was cooler here, filled with the scent of juniper and stone dust. Echoes followed every hoofbeat, as if unseen spirits whispered their judgment from the cliffs. Naya slowed her horse and lifted a hand. "This place," she said softly, "was once full of life. My people's fires burned bright here." Her eyes glimmered in the dying light. "Now it is quiet." Cole dismounted. scanning the shadows with a soldier's instinct. "Quiet can mean peace," he offered, "or trouble waitin'." They led the horses into a narrow pass, where the canyon opened into a hidden valley. There, half buried beneath the rock, stood the remains of an Apache village, empty, silent, the wind carrying only memories. Naya dismounted slowly, her hand brushing over a weathered totem pole, her expression unreadable. "This was my mother's home," she whispered. "They took her when I was small." Cole fell to tightness in his chest. "Soldiers?" he asked. She nodded once. "Bluecoats. They said they came to protect, but they brought fire instead." Cole said nothing. He'd ridden with men like that once, young and foolish, before he'd learned what orders could really mean. He felt the old guilt stirring like a snake in the sun. Then, out of the canyon shadows, came movement. Cole's hand dropped to his gun, but Naya lifted hers in warning. 3 figures emerged, Apache warriors, faces painted, bows drawn tight. One stepped forward, tall and proud, eyes hard as flint. He spoke in Apache, voice sharp. Naya answered quickly, her tone calm but firm. The words came too fast for Cole to catch, but he could read the tension in her shoulders. The lead warrior's gaze shifted to Cole, the stranger, the white man beside an Apache woman. He spat in the dirt, barking something that made Naya flinch. Cole stood still, every muscle taut, knowing one wrong move could end everything. Finally, Naya turned to him, her face pale beneath the desert dust. "They are my mother's kin," she said quietly. "They think you are my prisoner." Cole gave a dry half-smile. "Guess I've been called worse." Her eyes searched his, filled with worry and something deeper. "If they believe you are enemy, they will kill you." Cole looked past her, at the warriors who glared at him with centuries of pain behind their eyes. "Then we better give 'em reason to believe otherwise," he said. "Because I ain't letting you face this alone, Naya." The Apache warriors led them through the canyon with weapons still drawn, their eyes fixed on Cole like hawks watching prey. They reached a hollow where a fire burned low, surrounded by hide tents and silent faces. It wasn't many. 12, maybe, the remnants of what had once been a proud people. Elders sat cross-legged, watching as Cole was pushed forward. Nay spoke rapidly in her native tongue, her hands moving in gesture and plea. The old man at the fire, wrapped in a buffalo robe, listened without blinking. When she finished, he studied Cole long and hard. Then he spoke in broken English. "Why white man come with Apache woman?" Cole met his stare without flinching. "To help," he said simply. "She was under attack. I stayed." The elder's eyes narrowed. "Many white men say this before they kill." Cole nodded slowly. "Can't blame you for doubting. But if I meant her harm, I'd have done it when the bullets started flying." Last night, a murmur ran through the gathered crowd. The old man's gaze flicked to Naya. "He speaks true." She hesitated only a breath, then said, "Yes, he saved my life." A long silence followed. Then the elder gestured toward the fire. "Then he will walk through flame." Cole blinked. "Beg pardon." Naya turned to him, her face solemn. "It is the old way," she said softly, "to prove your spirit is true." Two men laid down a narrow path of glowing embers. Cole stared at it, then gave a slow, crooked grin. "Reckon I've walked through worse." He stepped forward, boots sinking into the heat, the air thick with smoke and testing eyes. The fire hissed and snapped at his heels, but he never broke stride. When he reached the end, he turned, tipping his hat toward the elder. "That good enough?" The old man's lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "You are either brave," he said, "or foolish. Both are close to the same." Laughter rippled softly through the people. The tension broke like dry thunder. Naya's eyes shone with pride and something warmer, something tender. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm. "They will not harm you now," she whispered. "You belong here. For a while." Cole looked round the circle of faces, then back at her. "Guess I've been looking for a place to belong," he said quietly, and as the firelight flickered between them, the bond forged in battle began to deepen into something stronger, something that felt a lot like love. That night, the fire burned low in the Apache camp, throwing long shadows across the canyon walls. The air was cool, touched with the scent of sage and smoke. Cole sat apart from the others, whittling a piece of mesquite wood, the soft rasp of his knife steady and calm. The stars above were bright enough to make a man believe in God again. Naya approached silently, wrapped in a woven blanket of crimson and gold. She sat beside him without a word, her presence soft as the wind. For a long time, neither spoke. The night didn't need words. It was enough to hear the crackle of the fire and the faraway cry of a nighthawk. Finally, Naya broke the silence. "You did not have to walk through the fire," she said. Cole chuckled low, not looking up. "Maybe not, but I figured if a man's gonna stand beside you, he ought to own it proper." She smiled faintly. "You are a strange cowboy, Cole," he shrugged. "Guess that's why I'm still alive." Her laughter was soft, real, the first he'd heard from her since the day they met. It warmed something deep inside him, something that had been cold too long. "When I was a child," Naya said, "my mother told me that love was like the desert wind. You can't see it, but you can feel it when it passes." She turned her eyes to the fire. "I thought she was wrong, until now." Cole's hand still on the wood. He looked at her, really looked, at the strength carved into her face, the sadness that hadn't broken her, the light that still burned in her eyes. "Reckon your mother was right," he said softly. "I can feel it too." The moment lingered, gentle as dawn. Naya reached out, tracing the scar along his forearm. "You carry many battles," she said. "Some you do not speak of." Cole nodded slowly. "Ain't much worth telling," he murmured. "But maybe I've been ridden all this time just to find this one place. This one person. That made it worth the road." She met his gaze, and in that quiet canyon, their hands found each other's. The fire crackled. A shooting star burned across the sky, and for the first time in years, Cole felt peace. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, under the wide, unbroken sky, he wasn't just a drifter. He was home. The dawn came red and restless, bleeding across the canyon walls like the sky itself was warning them. Cole woke to the distant thunder of hooves. The camp stirred. Whispers, fear, the sharp sound of arrows being notched. Naya was already standing, bow in hand, her eyes fixed on the narrow pass leading into the valley. "Soldiers," she said grimly. "They have found us." Cole grabbed his rifle and rose to his feet. "How many?" "Too many," he answered. Dust clouds rose in the distance. Cavalry blew and their horses cutting through the desert like a tide of iron. The tribe scattered, preparing to fight or flee. Cole knew there was no outrunning rifles and cannon. "We hold him here," he said, his voice firm. "You get the women and the old ones into the caves." Naya shook her head. "I fight with you." He opened his mouth to protest, but the look in her eyes stopped him. "All right," he said quietly. "Then we stand together." When the first shots cracked across the canyon, the world became noise and dust. Bullets struck stone. Arrows hissed through the air. Cole fired with steady precision, covering the retreating villagers. A shell burst near the rocks, throwing him backward. Pain seared his shoulder, but he pushed himself up, gritting his teeth. Naya was beside him, loosing arrow after arrow with fierce grace. The soldiers faltered in the narrow pass, their formation breaking against the canyon's wrath. Cole saw his moment. He took aim at the officer's horse, fired once, and the beast went down screaming. The soldiers wavered, confused, shouting orders lost in the echo. Now, Naya called, signaling her people. They surged forward, driving the invaders back out of the canyon's mouth. When silence finally fell, the air was thick with smoke and victory. Cole dropped to one knee, blood on his sleeve, breathing hard. Naya knelt beside him, pressing her hand over the wound. "You'll live," she said, though her voice trembled. He grinned faintly. "You sound awful sure of that." She smiled through tears. The desert does not take those it needs round them. The tribe gathered, lifting their voices in song, a song of the living. Cole looked up at the morning light spilling through the cliffs, painting Naya's face in gold. "Guess I finally found where I belong," he murmured. She touched his cheek gently. "You have found more than that, Cole. You have found your heart." He took her hand in his, their fingers interlacing against the rising sun. And as the wind swept through Red Canyon, carrying the ashes of the past into the endless sky, two souls stood together, bound by courage, healed by love, and free at last beneath the desert's eternal light.